So I'm Elizabeth Wengler. I'm married to that guy right there, John, and I'm mom to Floyd, who's way there in the back, so if he starts getting like toddlers do, he can go. I'm also a nurse up at the hospital here at Prairie Lakes. I work on med-surg peds sometimes, and other times I'm a house supervisor, so you might see me anywhere. And I'm here tonight to share with you my story, which is pretty improbable at times. If you had told me about 5 years ago that I would be speaking in front of a group and telling my story of how I became a Catholic, I would have told you were crazy, that would never happen. But here I am. And even when Missy first asked me way back in August if I would consider talking, I pretty quickly through my prayers got the answer that I should speak. But I kind of asked God, like, what do you expect me to say? Nothing about my story feels particularly unique or even that simple. Like, when I think about my story, like, my life is still pretty messy. And my story of conversion is certainly very messy. I mean, it took a miracle just to get me in the doors of a Catholic church at all. And just this last summer, right when Missy called me, I was struggling again. I was struggling to just get to Mass on Sundays because when you have morning sickness, we're expecting another baby in February. Sometimes you just want to sit on your couch and eat pancakes on Sunday. You don't want to get up and wrangle your toddler through the homily. And so as I was thinking about this, I was like, well, maybe that's the whole point. Maybe what people need to hear sometimes is not these stories where you get it right away. Maybe what people need to hear are the stories where it's messy. And so I'm here to tell you my messy story. So one of the reasons that it would be so hard for me to think that 5 years ago I would be saying that I was Catholic is I wasn't raised Catholic. I was raised Christian. And my parents did an amazing job. As a child, I couldn't help but think that God was good and that He loved me, and that's really because of them. We went to church every Sunday. I went to Sunday school on Sundays, and then I also went to release time on Wednesdays, and then we had extra stuff all through the year. So I was in some sort of religious education for at least 2 hours a week from the time I was Floyd's age till I was a senior in high school. And then at home, we also prayed before meals and before bedtime. And I also grew up on a farm, and I think the great thing about being a farm kid is that seeing God everywhere is just so natural. Like, how can you not see God when you go out to feed this fuzzy little bottle calf and it tries to suck on your kneecaps? Like, that's a pretty cool thing. And then in sunsets and just the way like the corn seems to grow 3 inches after it rains, like that was all so amazing to me. And so as a child, my faith was just so natural. It was like breathing. But I think something that as I grew up, which all children inevitably grow up, that became hard is I was a pretty good kid. One of my nicknames growing up was Lizzie Two Shoes because I was such a goody two shoes. And the thing about being a good kid is you think being good will protect you from things that happen in life and that it'll all just be easy. That's kind of just how children think, but as I became a teenager, that became pretty quickly, like that's not how it works. God's not up there like some accountant saying, oh yeah, you're a good kid, you get good grades, you lied to your parents once about that C on your paper, but most of the time you're pretty good. You know, it doesn't work out that way. I got picked on because I was kind of a nerdy kid, and I experienced some other things that just made me ask God, you know, like, why is this going on? Like, why am I suffering? And the other thing is, too, I was a kid who watched the news, and when you turn on the TV, back in the 90s, when you turn the TV on now, you can't help but see that bad things happen to innocent people all the time. And so I had this question of, why do we suffer? And then also, how can we be lovable when we live in this world where sin makes us suffer so much? And so at the same time I was struggling with that very personal relationship with God, I was also struggling with some more theological questions. Like I said, I was a nerdy kid. I've always just wanted to know how the world works. Like, I've always been a science geek and things like that. And I applied those same sort of thoughts to God. I wanted to know how salvation worked. And there were so many questions that when I asked my pastor or my Sunday school teachers, I didn't feel like I got the best answers to. I wanted to know things like why the God of the Old Testament sounded so different from the God of the New Testament. And I wanted to know why there were so many different churches and why my church said that it had it right. When in fact in this town that I grew up in rural South Dakota, I was the minority. Actually, most of my classmates were Catholic, and the church I grew up in said that Catholics had a pretty hard time getting to heaven because of all the extra stuff that they believed in. And at the time that I was struggling with my relationship with God, actually a lot of my Catholic classmates seemed to have a better relationship, so that was confusing to me. And so, like I said, all these things kept building up, all these questions. And so by the time I was a senior in high school, my relationship with God was pretty broken. And it bothered me. I thought about it a lot. And as I prepared to go off to college, I thought, this would be the perfect time to work on this broken relationship. I decided to go to SDSU in Brookings and pursue a chemistry major. And my parents were like, you need to find a faith community right away. And they wanted me to find that faith community in the denomination they brought me up in. And I agreed to do that, and I did do that. But at the same time, I secretly was like, I bet a campus this big is going to have about every denomination of Christian imaginable represented there. This is a good time to church shop. And so I made a list of characteristics that I thought would help me rebuild my relationship with God. There were 3 big things. So the biggest one being I wanted a church or a Bible study that would help me rebuild my relationship with God. I wanted theological answers for some of my questions that were logical and consistent, really based on the Bible. And then I wanted the worship that I experienced in this group to be reverent. I didn't, and I'm still not like a very woo-woo type of person. So I appreciate quiet and, praying silently. So those are my 3 big things. And for those of you who went to SDSU, they probably have this at other colleges too. But the first week of classes, there's this big club fair. Nice. Club fair. So I went to this fair. And any booth that had a cross at it, or they had Jesus or Christ in their name, I went to that booth and I talked to somebody. And as I kind of bounced around, I'd sort them. I had a yes pile and a no pile. And I remember the group that I got most excited about, I never followed up on, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And I distinctly remember this girl that I talked to, because she had really great hair. My mom's a beautician, and she had this long brunette hair. It was straight and silky, and not the kind of hair I'll ever have. And so I remember distinctly physically what she looked like, but she was also just alive. You could tell she really loved Jesus. And a lot of the things she talked about checked my boxes. The whole point of their theological discussions and their worship was to build a relationship with Jesus. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm excited about this. And then she brought up that the Newman Center was Catholic. I was like, oh, well, I'm not Catholic, sorry. And she's like, well, you can still come. And I'm like, no, I can't. And so I never went to the Newman Center, not once while I was at SDSU. But I went to all these other groups. I went to a lot of different places. And sometimes a couple things off my list were checked. I found people who really cared about Jesus, but maybe their group didn't have great theological answers to my questions. Or maybe the worship was great, but, other things were lacking. And so my relationship with God continued to feel hard. It was tedious, it was exhausting, and it wasn't positive. And a lot of other things in my life were exciting all of a sudden. I all of a sudden was making really nerdy friends. who I got along with, like, we would stay home in the dorms on Saturdays and read books instead of going to the football game, and that's what we did. So I really fit in, and then my classes, I would hear other people complain about chemistry and calculus, and I was like, that's easy. And so that was really satisfactory for me, and I began to see how I could maybe build a career in research. And that's what I started to build my identity around. I gradually lost this idea that my identity should be based on my relationship with God, and instead started to base it on this idea of a career and success. And so by my junior, senior year of college, that's really where I was at. Without that anchor of faith, I really didn't have an idea of truth. In fact, if you'd asked me, I probably would have told you that, well, we can't really know right or wrong. As long as you're not hurting anybody, go for it. Do what you want. And I thought of myself as a person who was good without God. And I didn't really have a reason to question myself as a good person until one of my very close best friends told me something about that I finally heard her say. She had probably told me this before, but we were studying for a class, and I honestly don't remember what class it was, but she was asking me to explain some concept to her, and she was having a hard time with it. And I felt myself getting frustrated, kind of like, why can't you get this? And she looked at me and she said, when you talk to me like this, you make me feel about this big. She's like, you make me feel so stupid. And for the record, she is one of the smartest people you'll ever meet. She is an OBGYN now. And I went home to our apartment. We were actually roommates too. And I sat down and I thought about this, and I was like, you know, she's right. I'm kind of an arrogant jerk sometimes. I really do think I'm better than other people because I'm smarter than them. And at first I thought I could change this because I realized it. I could change how I treated other people by thinking about it, and pretty soon I found that I couldn't. And so I'm like, well, how can I change this? And the only option that made sense to me at the time was that I had to have a career that would change me. And so I threw away my graduate school applications. I was applying to PhD programs, Berkeley, University of New Mexico, Worcester, Massachusetts. And I instead applied to SDSU's accelerated nursing program, horrifying my parents and my professors. And so I got in, and I was like, haha, this will fix me. And in a lot of ways, nursing has been a huge part of my journey. I don't want to poo-poo that at all, because nurses really do have to humble ourselves in a lot of ways and take care of people when they're very vulnerable. But you think maybe it would have occurred to me at the same time that religion might be able to help me in my journey a little bit, but that was the farthest thing from my mind. And just to give you a little context to where I was, I thought it would do the opposite of help me. I avoided going to my parents' house on Sundays because I didn't want to go to church with them. About this time, I got engaged to my husband, and we decided to get married in his hometown just for convenience. And you know, it probably would have made sense to get married in the church he grew up with. But I said no, I absolutely would not, because it was a Catholic church, and that was the worst kind of church. So we got married in a Methodist church. But the thing I'm probably most ashamed of, and I still just cringe when I think about it, is I found out about this time that my grandmother was dying of stomach cancer, and she was on hospice for about 5 months before she passed away. And at the time, there were so many things that I loved about how she handled dying. Like, she sat each of her grandkids down and told us about her life, how she met our grandpa, being a young farm wife. And she even took the time to pass out her possessions. Like, this is her wedding ring that I wear all the time. And when she couldn't find somebody in the family to give her possessions away to, I remember one time she came to me, she's like, hey, you have big feet. And I'm like, yeah, Grandma, I always had big feet. She's like, well, my shoes won't fit you. None of my daughters-in-law or my granddaughters, my shoes will fit. But she's like, what size of shoe does your friend Meredith have? I'm like, well, probably about the same size as you. She's like, after I die, you should take my shoes to Meredith and see which ones she wants. Okay, I can do that. But the thing I didn't appreciate about how my grandma handled dying is she also worked on her relationship with God. She spent a lot of time praying, reading her Bible, and she wanted to pray with her family, and I adamantly refused to do that. Like, I couldn't even find it in myself to say, this is something important with her. I can whip out a Lord's Prayer here and there to make her happy. And I even remember being annoyed at her funeral that it was so religious, and it just makes me cringe when I think about it. But that's where I was. And that's where I was for quite a few years. I got married, moved to Watertown, started working at the hospital. And I was making friends. And I was friends with Maria Curtis. You might remember her talk from Faith in Real Life. And I liked a lot of things about Maria, but as you can imagine, I didn't like that she liked to talk about her faith all the time. That was really annoying to me. So one January, it was January of 2016, John and I were in Walmart picking up dog food. I don't know why I remember that we were in the dog food aisle, but that's where we were. And I got this text on my phone from Maria inviting me to a Bible study. And I went, oh! And my husband was like, what? Like, why are you making that noise in public? And so I read him off the text message, and I'm like, why would she even invite me? And he was like, well, you shouldn't say no right away. He's like, think about it. And we talked about it for a while, and I think the thing that finally convinced me was when he said, she's your friend. And he's like, don't you complain to me all the time like how you find religion annoying. And he's like, you run into it all the time as a nurse. He's like, you should at least try to go because she's your friend. And so I said yes, and I went. And that first night in Maria's living room, all the young women went around in the circle and said where they were at in their faith journey. And it got to me. And I said, I was raised Christian, but I don't believe in that anymore, and I'm just here to become more tolerant of religious people. And God bless them, they didn't kick me out and say, that is so rude, like they probably should have. They kept me. And I found myself liking this group of women. I really appreciated how vulnerable they were. And I actually found I really liked the book, even though it was super religious. And I brought a copy with me. Anybody that's part of a women's group or even a men's group, like, this is an amazing book to use for a Lenten study. And I really liked it because the whole point of the book was to simplify your life. It's called Simplifying the Soul, so that you could make time for God. And at first, obviously, I did not use that extra time for God. But who doesn't need less busyness in their life? And the activities in here are just good for a person. Just to read off some of them, one of them was scrub a dirty floor, or try sleeping on the floor for a night to appreciate what people who go without have to go without through. And so it was on page 100. It's a little more than halfway through the book when it actually explicitly made me pray. And by this point, I had done most of these activities, so I was like, okay, I will try praying the rosary. It's not a prayer I've ever done in my entire life, but I will try it. And the whole activity was actually to pray the rosary while walking. And so I looked up the rosary, and it's really complicated when you haven't done it before. So I'm like, well, I cannot walk and do this. I cannot handle that at the same time. So I wrote out all the prayers, and I wrote out the sequence and laid them on my couch. And I sat down on my couch. I'm like, I'm going to give this the whole college try. I'm going to go all the way through it. And so I sat down, and I started praying, and it took me a while to get into a rhythm. But once I finally got into a rhythm, I was like, why am I starting to tear up? I felt myself getting emotional. And I was like, what is this all about? Keep it together. And when I start to get upset, anybody who knows me well knows I put my hands in my hair and I cover my face. And so that's what I did. I had my eyes all closed, and I remember having to push my dog away a couple of times. He was like, "Why are you crying, dog mom?" But I couldn't keep from crying, and I was just, what is this all about? And then about halfway through, like I said, my eyes were closed, but I saw Mary. And even just this woman, and I also heard her tell me that she was praying for me until I could pray to Jesus. And I just felt this peace that I had forgotten, honestly, a person could feel. And so then I was really crying. But I finished that rosary, gosh darn it. I finished it from start to end. And I sat on my couch and I was just floored. And maybe I should have been excited, and after a little bit I was, and amazed, but my initial reaction, again, I'm not proud of. Pretty sure the first thing I said to God again was, "What are you doing?" Because I didn't want to be drugged back into believing in Jesus all of a sudden. And the other thing is, I'd seen Mary. And so I knew I had to be Catholic. And that was flabbergasting for me. And so I started hurling at God all these things that I remembered. Like, Catholics don't follow the Bible anyway. They have extra books in there even. Like, they have all these traditions that are probably going to lead you to hell instead of heaven. And I just was hurling all these things, arguing. And I was like, why can't I be a Methodist or a Lutheran or a Baptist? Or I'm like, heck, I'll even be Mormon and give up coffee and beer. But I saw Mary, and where do you find her at? And so my husband came home, and I kind of told him what happened. Not really. In fact, I've only told, this is 5 on up for people I've told about this, and I kind of told my husband, I'm like, started crying while praying the rosary, and now I think I need to be Catholic, and let's start going to Mass again. And he was excited about this. He's like, yeah, this is great, because he'd been trying to get me to go to church with him for a long time. And so we started going, and gradually I did get over the initial negative reaction. I was excited about going to church, and I found I liked Mass, and even though I couldn't take communion, I always got emotional when I watched everybody else go up. And then I found out I would have to actually take a class to become Catholic. I found out there's this thing called RCIA, and that it takes about 6 months. And I remember hearing, 6 months, that sounds like a great amount of time to try and indoctrinate a person. Because I still wasn't on board with believing all these Catholic-y things. Like, no thank you. But I was at least at a point where I was ready to listen to how the church thought about these things, so that I could say in good conscience, no, this is why I do not believe in this. And so I did what felt logical to me. I didn't go talk to a priest. That would have been the logical thing. Instead, I downloaded a bunch of podcasts and ordered a bunch of books. And to my shock, I couldn't argue with about 2,000 years of theology. It's like, oh man, the Pope just doesn't slap all these rules in a book willy-nilly. I'm like, people have actually thought about this. And I still wasn't completely convinced on a lot of things, but I was shocked to find out other things, and kind of opened a couple of doors in my heart. Like, I found out that actually a lot of these traditions do go all the way back to the beginning, and the Eucharist being the body and blood of Jesus, Christians have believed that since the beginning. But I was pretty stubborn and resistant, and I should have known that if God was willing to show me his mother, to even get me in the door, that he would use something pretty radical to bring me and with a bunch of the other beliefs. And one of the first things that kind of started putting a chip in that was I still was not on board with what it meant to be married. You know, in the Catholic Church, there's some pretty strict rules, like one man, one woman, for life. And that had never made sense to me even growing up when I believed in God, because I'm like, okay, sure, we're just supposed to keep our hormones in a box until we get married, and then it's all happy, fun, and games. That had never made sense to me. But then I listened to a speaker talk about how chastity was something for everybody, whether you're a teenager or a married person or someone who's religious. And I'm like, you know, that actually does make sense, because then they went a step further and said chastity's really about respect. And then he went another step further and said, and part of that respect for your spouse is part of why the church teaches us to not use birth control. I was like, no, stop, too far. And then I listened more, and I listened to a woman talk, which for me was a big thing, and she talked about how it could actually be a feminist choice because your husband had to respect how your body worked. And I was like, oh, what are you doing, God? Why are you letting this make sense? And then I was like, but no, wait, people don't actually do this, even though I know people who actually did it by this point. And so I listened to something more practical and found out I wouldn't be perpetually pregnant. And I was like, oh no. And so I went and talked to my husband and said, you know, this thing kind of makes sense, but maybe if we try it and we decide we don't like it and it doesn't work for us, we can at least say we tried, and then our conscience will be clear. And maybe it'll make me feel better. Like, maybe we can try it for my health. And he kind of looked at me. He's like, I'll try it for your health. Sure, honey, this is going to last. And after a couple of months, we were shocked to find that it was actually one of the hardest things we'd ever done, but one of the best things we'd ever done together. Because we actually had to talk on a daily, monthly basis about what we wanted. And we were actually like finding ways to show each other we loved each other without using our bodies. Like, it had never occurred to me that maybe my husband would appreciate me taking him a coffee in the middle of the week. But I started to do that. It's still something I do. I'll go through to Caribou and just bring him a coffee. But why it had never occurred to me that that might be something he would appreciate, I don't know. But it started to occur to me then. And so we found ourselves doing exactly what we said we wouldn't do, which was radically change our lives because we were Catholic. And you can imagine what realizing this one day did to me. I was like, oh no, and I wanted to throw it all away again and say, no, 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 this is too much. And again, God threw me a bone. He had been, throughout this whole process, Maria had been there listening to me as I complained, and gradually I started finding her faith not annoying, but something to look up to. And it was precisely when I needed to see how powerful faith could be that Maria was going through a really hard time in her life, and her faith was powerful. She absolutely clung to Jesus as she lost her mother, and I couldn't help but think that that's something worth keeping going after. And so John and I continued going. We started going to RCIA, and by that point, our hearts were more open. We didn't go to RCIA thinking, okay, we're gonna like put the kibosh on some of these things. We went into it genuinely wanting to know what the church taught. And we went on, and every night after RCIA on Thursday nights, we would go out afterwards. That was date night that year. And we'd go out and we'd talk about what we learned, and we were shocked to not only find that these things made sense, but that they were also beautiful, and that we actually wanted to change our lives for Jesus. We wanted to go to confession. We wanted to make our marriage what God wanted it to be. And so by the time we got to that marriage portion and found out that, oops, our marriage wasn't valid because we didn't ask to get married in that Methodist church, we were pretty on board with redoing our vows before we became part of the church. And we had to do the whole marriage prep thing like people who hadn't been married for 2 years. So by the time the Easter Vigil rolled around, we were excited. And so that week, I went to confession for the first time, and it wasn't absolutely horrible like I thought it would be. And then on Saturday, we got to say our vows again to each other, which was pretty hilarious when you got to the part about welcoming children, because I was very pregnant by that point. And so everybody laughed. And then that night, I got to receive the Eucharist next to my husband. How cool is that? I just remember being on this spiritual high for weeks afterwards. And I also remember saying, I am not going to mess this up. Like, God, I am giving everything I am to you. And I could end my story right here on the high note, the same spiritual high I was on. But the funny thing is that I fell down again, like we all do. I told you, it's messy. I'm not going to leave you with this, like, oh, moment. I had that baby, and life got really, really hard. You know, infants are needy. He was a miracle. Like, don't get me wrong, I love my little Floyd, but, I mean, kids are hard. He never slept. He was hard to feed. Like, everything was just hard, and I didn't get to Mass on Sundays all the time. And even in my marriage, I lied to my husband, and for a couple months there, I used birth control again because, heck, I was not ready for another one of those. Because I was relying on myself. I'd fallen back into that thing, thinking that I was in charge of my own life, and that's what I needed to do. And I finally realized that, no, I needed to get my butt back in that confessional and say to God, I need you, and I cannot do this on my own. And it took me a couple months to do that. But I finally did. And kept going again. And even now, when I can say, my faith is a big part of my life, we honestly try very hard, my husband and I, to make faith part of our everyday life, that it's still really hard some days. I still want to be that person that is in control of my own life and says, this is what I'm doing. But part of realizing that I need Jesus is just that. I need Jesus. I cannot do it on my own. And so that's my story, is that God's still working on me every day. I can't point to a moment in time and say that's where he saved me. If I wanted to, I could probably point to that day on my couch where I saw Mary. But like I said, I have all these other points where he saved me, and he's still saving me, and I think that's the point for all of us.